Okay.
Sorry about that. Just want to make sure that we can save this video for those who, for one or other reason, won't be able to join us. But again, this morning we're going to be discussing about the initial list of strategies and solutions for the Beyond 77 corridor study. We have a pretty busy agenda, and I'm going to go really quickly over the names that I can see on my screen. My apologies in advance if I mispronounce any names. So I can see Adam Howell with Atkins, James Parhill with Atkins, Andrew Ventresca with Town of Davidson, Mr. Bill Cox, a special guest. Welcome to join us. Brandon Brazil with City of Charlotte, see that? Brian, we'll assume it's Brian Nadoldy with City of Charlotte, Cats. But please let me know after I'm done if that's incorrect. Then I see Brian Elgort with CRTPO. And by the way, he is our newest, or one of our newest employees for the CRTPO family. So welcome, Brian Elgort. Then next I have David Hooper with South Carolina MPO RFATS, Dominic Boyd with NCDOT, sorry, with NCDOT Planning Division, Gary Fournier with Town of Cornelius, Jarrell Leonard with CRTPO, Yuri Delaro Keith with CRTPO, Kathy Cornett with City of Charlotte Planning Department. Keep losing, as people come in, I keep losing my my location. Martin Kinnamon with City of Charlotte, see that? Mr. Michael Johnson, thank you for joining us, Michael. Richard Hoffman with Idaho County, Warren Cooksey, NCDOT, the Turnpike Authority, Jorge Luna, special guest with HDR. And I see a couple of phone numbers, so if you don't mind, please tell us who you are. And anybody else that I probably missed. I have a 704 last 4 digits 9761 and another 704 last 4 3953. Okay. Well, once again, thank you for joining us this morning. And without further ado, we'll pass it over to Adam Howell for the next agenda item.
All right. So really quick, I want to ask you to go to menti.com, and I'll leave this code up there for a little bit. Pull up a browser on the computer that you're using or on your smartphone. You'll probably already see a question activated, but there will be zero context for you. We'll get to that point after a quick overview and kind of catching you up on progress to date of the study. But please go to menti.com, use the code 5435-5360. We have a few questions to ask of you as we go through the first portion of this. And thank you, Augustine, for putting that in. That is also in the chat box, menti.com, and the code associated. So that being said, many of you have been involved with the technical approach to this project, and so we're going to do a quick recap just to make sure that everybody is up to speed as to where we've been and where we're going. So just a quick reminder, the key areas that we defined as a part of this study serve as the foundation for everything that the team has come up with thus far that defines this preliminary set of recommendations. That is the list that Augustine referred to. That would be the areas of policymaking, programming, and project implementation. You see on the screen here, funding concepts can support any one of those to then help support and pay for, as well as emerging technologies can be blended in to support the function of any one of those three key areas in the center. And as we created components of that list, we used those categories as they may be defined as to build a set of solutions. The process kicked off back in November. We had a team of 20 planners across multiple teams. They put their heads together and they started creating a list that followed the charge bold from CRTPO to provide new ideas that will improve mobility for all within and around the I-77 corridor. And it would have been great to have a physical space to do that in, but we did it all virtually. So we had folks from around the country, including here in Charlotte, helping to develop those ideas. If you remember the story map and the comprehensive existing review that we did back in last spring and early summer, we relied on all the plans and data that many of you all provided as partners as a part of this study to help inform that initial process. And we worked with CRTPO to develop a spatial review analysis. The travel demand model was foundational in terms of helping us understand some of the impacts that were going to be coming down the pipeline in the future from population growth. But with all the different things applicable from those key areas that were identified in the previous slide, that we needed to do a little bit more connection between land use and transportation aspects that would supplement the efforts of the travel demand model. So we used all the aspects that were built into the story map that was published last summer to help planners do that spatial analysis and to develop several pieces of the strategies and recommendations list that we'll talk about later in this process. The team then created an evaluation decision hierarchy based on feedback from months of stakeholder conversations. If you remember, you were involved with several of those pieces last fall. We got together in September and October and had some detailed discussions with folks from business groups and community groups that joined us to tell us what they thought, as well as the public provided feedback. And we boiled it down into these 6 bubbles that you see here. They are listed and organized in no particular order. There is no scalability to these at this point in time, but we'll talk about that in a second. And then all the little things that surround it are all the other components that help develop our overarching evaluation structure, where we apply a rubric scale and weight scenarios. The weight scenarios, we'll talk about that in a second, which you helped to define early on, apply to these 6 large bubbles around the ideal solution. We initially came up with well over 200 strategies and solutions for recommendations, and we needed to help to consolidate, boil them down, maybe organize them a bit better, and then to put them in better terms of understanding from a transportation and planning world, as well as kind of mobility and policy and programmatic aspects. And so we got the list down to about 170 individual line items, and then we organized them into 30 separate categories bundled in within the 4 key areas. And I say 4 key areas because you saw 5 earlier. Working with CRTPO over the winter, we decided that it would be effective if we removed the aspect of funding concepts from the evaluation process, because it didn't make sense to compare funding alternatives across this evaluation framework, because those would be a standalone thing that our team is doing to complete a different form of analysis on, rather than doing it through this evaluation process. So funding is still a big part of this. It's just not part of this list that we're going to be discussing today. And then you guys all had the opportunity to provide us some feedback on the weighting scenarios that we had as a part of the evaluation process. You see here on the screen, we did work with 4 initial scenarios to apply weights for to those 6 items there, if you remember those 6 bubbles around the ideal solution. And our main priority right now is to focus on the differences between scenario 1 and scenario 2. Scenario 1 is an alignment more with safety and travel performance. You know, does the solution gravitate more to providing a benefit to those components, or does the solution that we're talking about specifically, or a category, talk about is there a greater alignment with a multimodal land use coordination? And so these are where the current percentage weights are applied throughout the list components we'll be talking to today. CRTPO provided a scenario 3 just to identify how things would align with the MTP. And then this 4th scenario was calculated from public feedback that was provided back in phases 1 from last spring, and then the end of phase 2 completed at the start of last fall. So right now we are focusing solely on scenario 1 and 2, and eventually we will get to the point later this summer where we will get to 1 scenario. We will apply these weights across the board and have a better approach for CRTPO and all of you to prioritize, rank, and create an implementation action plan for what to do in the short, mid, and long term with these recommendations. This is just a big picture output. I just wanted to show you of the 170 plus items, this is what our evaluation output looks like, taking into those 6 factors of consideration, from equity all the way through child performance. These are what we look at as a team from a technical perspective. And you can kind of see all of the different weights and how they all apply across the board. And then we performed a sensitivity analysis, and that's what leads into what we'll be talking about together today. Sensitivity analysis across the 2 scenarios. And so what you see here on the screen is the items that are over here on the left of the screen are strategies and or solutions that are performing well, or are scoring high across both of those scenarios. The ones that are over on the right are the ones that are performing at the lowest of those 2 scenario weights. The ones with the large line gaps in between the 2 points represent deviation or level of variation between the 2 scoring outputs from each scenario. And we're going to focus on each one of those through a little bit of level of detail. We are not looking at all 170 with you today. As the steering committee members, Augustine and I discussed that we wanted to focus more on technical applications, a little bit of programming, and some projects. And so we'll be talking about those today. But before I move forward, that was just a quick recap to catch everybody up. Augustine, I wanted to stop and see if there were any questions before we do get into the top performing items that we have scheduled for them today.
Any questions in general? No, I don't see any questions on the chat box either.
Oh, perfect.
Okay.
So I want to help gear you guys up for what we're going to be doing today. And I'll show the next slide as an example. It looks like a lot of text, but we're going to work through it together. And the first 5, we're going to be focusing on those top performing strategies. And what we're looking for from you is more of a, not necessarily a comprehensive dialogue unless you have explicit feedback to provide. We're looking for confirmation of basically, yep, that makes sense. We're going to do a level of agreement Mentimeter survey process with you just to gauge your level of agreement with where that sits and how it's defined. And then we're going to move into those bottom performers and those varied aspects of some of those solutions that are on our current draft list of recommendations. So with that being said, I do want to start out with the first of the top 5, and these are not listed in particular order, but they are taken from that top section of that sensitivity graph that I showed you on that previous slide. And this is coming from the key area of programming, and it's talking about, or it's recommending that there could or should be a program coordination effort supporting integrated corridor management. And in italics, you'll see below that rolls up into the category umbrella of system performance measurement and management. And I am going to read it a little bit to you guys. State and regional and local government should employ a robust partnership and coordination program to ensure effective implementation of ICM strategies region-wide. We did document as a part of the greater list details that there is this effort going on with NCDOT to look at kind of a micro-level strategy along I-85 in Gaston County, but regional and local coordination efforts are still slow to develop. Once coordination support exists, the region can begin to develop strategies on how to best develop an ICM protocol and inform regional transportation management functions. So again, that's just a draft statement. There will be plenty of time to provide feedback on how things are documented, but I want to switch to this. If you go to your Mentimeter graph, want to check in and see if you agree or disagree with how that was presented to you. And I want to make sure that this is active for you guys. All right. I apologize. I don't know why it's not loading live for me here. So we've got some votes already coming in. Got a couple of votes right now. I'll give it another 15 seconds. I know that it was a lot to consider. Good call. I can certainly put that back up on the screen so everybody can see that text. All right. Well, so far we've got. I think we're still drinking our coffee. We've only got a total of 5 votes. Up, make that 6. But again, this is just helping CRTPO and the consultant team confirm or understand how overarching perspectives lie and how we might be able to firm up some things moving forward. Are there any general open comments about this one before we move on to the next? Okay. Moving on, the next one is really demonstrating how we're trying to align with and coordinate with efforts coming out of Connect Beyond. We've been working with the project team out of the Central Atlanta Council of Governments and HDR. Thank you, Jorge, for joining us today. And what you see here on the map is essentially we are almost completely aligning with what's coming out of their study at this point, and we will adjust as they adjust and respond to the public feedback and efforts that they're doing currently. But what you see here on the screen is all the mobility corridors that they are proposing as a part of their initial analysis, and then anything that we have documented as a part of this. So PI 12, as a part of our list, actually has several subcomponents, and anything that interacts with the I-77 corridor area, we've documented as we agree and confirm that this recommendation should be maintained and move forward as some form of a priority for the region to consider working through and adapting or adopting projects to operate and exist within. And so this map is taken from the Connect Beyond effort and mobility corridors. Jorge, if you want to help add on to what I'm about to say, it's just based on initial outputs coming from the Connect Beyond Charlotte Regional Transit Plan, and asking for regional and local agencies to coordinate to implement critical first mile and last mile / key local bus services along defined mobility corridors. And those are those green buffer lines throughout the map. So with that, we want to gauge your level of agreement and support of that recommendation.
I just want to add on something is, in case somebody's not doing the doodle poll thinking, oh, I'm voting on implementing or moving forward with this strategy. That's not the goal here. The goal is that we come up with this criteria to evaluate all of these 177 strategies. And after that, filtering through that process, we're looking at the top 5, more or less. So if the methodology is correct, we should be facing right now or looking at the ones that makes the most sense. Like if everything in the process that we're employing works, then we're looking at the top 5, this should be the top 5. So it shouldn't be so we are almost testing if the methodology is working correctly or as supposed to. So don't feel that you are by any means making a decision here that you are going to be in favor of this going forward. We're trying to see if this, in fact, is working correctly, or there are any changes we need to address with the methodology on how we are doing this evaluation criteria.
And so far, 7 out of roughly 18 of you have participated. So thank you to them. I'll give you a few more seconds to weigh in. I put the text and the map back up. And if you aren't familiar with the Connect Beyond initiative and some of these details, I certainly encourage you to go to their website, connect-beyond.com, and take a look at their interactive mapping layer that showcases all of this and the next one that I'm about to show you as well. All right, so we got 10 votes so far, and I will move on. I will share with you the results. I probably didn't share with you the previous one, but this one is showing majority of you agree or strongly agree, and there was one strongly disagree. So if that individual wants to provide that feedback later on, I would love to hear that so that we can understand the reasoning and moving forward how we might be able to document things better with our study in coordination with theirs. So the next one is in similar fashion. This is another initiative in alignment with the Connect Beyond effort. This one is specifically regarding high capacity transit corridors, and it's lumped in the general category of high capacity transit corridors as a part of our study. It is not including commuter rail. There's a separate initiative addressing that one solely. And this one is to seek regional and local coordination to implement critical high capacity transit services along these defined HCTC components. The technology and mode is not defined at this point in time. We are simply aligning to coordinate and support of these efforts. And again, we will adjust as needed as that study continues to evolve. And you can see almost all of these corridors interact with our study corridor and are applicable to the regional mobility effort of what we're all trying to do. With that, I will jump over to the next question. And again, do you agree and support the evaluation of PI10? I'll put the information back up so you can see that map in the text. Give another 5 to 8 seconds longer. And we'll close that one down. Bill Cox, I see your question in the chat box. Question has been posed to everybody so everybody can see it, but has the Connect Regional Transit Plan been formally adopted by the various policy boards as an essential element in their MTPs? Alex, I don't know if you want to address that immediately, but I know that it is not completed, so it is not yet a part of that process.
You're correct, Adam.
Okay. All right, well, moving on, we got 10 of those votes, so I appreciate those that are providing the feedback. It is helpful. And Jorge, thank you for weighing in and to alert that with Bill Cox. It is still underway. And Jorge, if you can also provide, I think that you guys are preparing to wrap up later this summer, if not around the same time we are. So it'll be a kind of a roadshow of planning initiative outcomes once we get to October timeframe for all of us. Moving to the next one. Now we're going to get into some more emerging technology aspects. And so one of the top performing strategies is generally applying a region-wide or corridor-specific video traffic signal detection system. And so video traffic signal detection can be used for motor vehicles, pedestrians, and bicycles at intersections and other key points along corridors to better inform incident and/or corridor management needs, as well as safe traffic movements. I am not familiar with, based on the information that was provided last year to us for many of you, if these are in fact used anywhere in the region, but they are certainly used in other metro regions of our country, and it was identified by our team as a optimal solution to recommend at this point in time. So with that, I will move to the opportunity to weigh in on this one. And I'll put the text back on the screen again. About 5 more seconds. And just as a general statement, I just want to make it known that anytime you see when we are talking about emerging technologies, all of these fall under the category of intelligent transportation systems applications. And so this is one of those when we ran it through the rating system of all the evaluation criteria, it was scoring very high because it can be applied to multiple modes, not just the general automotive or auto usage on our network today. There is the opportunity to have a multimodal approach for video signal detection throughout the entire network. It would just certainly take some effort to plan that out and implement. So I wanted to make that clear as to how and why this is performing so well. All right, and the majority of you agree. I appreciate that feedback. And then the last one to talk about in terms of the top performing strategies is this concept of we created a category because it was deemed necessary because there were a few of them that were very kind of standalone within this one area. It's called information dissemination systems. And this one is generally applied to the greater global public of the region, and we're looking at advanced traveler information systems. It's an application that provides for the collection, aggregation, and dissemination of a wide range of information, such as traffic, transit, road, weather, work zone, and connected vehicle related data. These already do exist to an extent, but not necessarily region-wide, especially when we're talking about mobile application integration being more effective with communicating with drivers in real time, as well as in-vehicle displays, talking about connected vehicle technologies and live dynamic web portals that enhance the 511 systems that exist today. And we know that the roadside signage does exist, especially along the interstates, but there's always opportunity to enhance and promote the more local aspects, as well as kind of building into the regional network that has been set as the foundation. So that's why our team felt that it was important to showcase this, because it can be a system that continually improved or improved upon and enhanced over time.
There is a question from Bill Cox on the chat box. Does the video detection technology rely on illumination? That is the question, and his comment is that traditionally there are difficulties with implementing and the illumination and maintenance thereof. Do we know that, Adam?
No, it's an interesting question. I would have to check with some of our ITS experts. Apologies that they could not be on this call today to help inform that, but I will reach back out to you with that information, Bill, and if that needs to alter how we define that solution recommendation, so be it. But I'm not sure if technologies have evolved to kind of help adjust and meet that kind of hump over the barrier.
Good. And not only for this one, I think this is a good point to look into many of these ET or technology strategies for limitations. Mm-hmm. So that on paper they sound and they look really good and beneficial, but of course we look at the cost of those things, of these elements, for the implementation of the initial cost, but also look at the maintenance, the long-term cost as well. So something to have in consideration. So I put a note to follow up on that, Bill. Thank you for that comment.
And so with that, we'll go ahead and launch the last question there. And how much do you agree and support the evaluation of the Advanced Traveler Information System? And I'll go back to that text. Give it about 10 more seconds. And again, this can be applied to any mode. It's not necessarily just you and your independent auto users. but it can be applied to multiple modes as the region decides to implement. Okay, we've got a little bit more wide array. Several of you strongly agree, and some neither agree or disagree. So good feedback, I appreciate that. So moving on, this is where Augustine and I will probably look to ask any of you to come off of mute and join in a dialogue, because these are going to be focusing more on the bottom performing items. We want to make sure that the way that things are defined are appropriate, and I'll explain why some things are performing more low. And there's always going to be something at the bottom, right? There's always going to be a bottom part of a list when you rank something. But there will be reasons why we define that. And I think that collectively, CRTPO is looking for this committee and advisory committee to kind of help when we document things in final reports to justify reasonings of why things are maintained and how we do that. And so you'll understand what we're talking about when we get into some of these. So we'll jump right into the poor performance. I'll stop really quick, Augustine, if there were any questions about those 5 that we just went through, other than the ones that were already posed in the, oh, there's the results now, besides the chat box questions.
Either questions or comments in general. Okay, thank you.
All right, so we just have one slide each for these. And so this is a project recommendation to look at improving outer suburb connections. And this is under the category of regional roadway improvements. We are suggesting and recommending that state, regional, and local agencies should coordinate to plan for and implement key facility infrastructure improvements to existing roadways that would enhance connectivity and ease localized congestion between key suburbs and main activity centers outside the urban core of the Charlotte metro area. The facilities that my team identified that would benefit from such improvements would be where the connections are made between US 601, US 321, NC 73, NC 75, and SC 161. And I will tell you that this stemmed from, this idea has evolved, where originally one of our team members had, and David Hooper, you will remember this, we had originally documented several months ago to consider like a second beltway, and this is put in place or in lieu of that, just to enhance connectivity of existing facilities rather than looking at a whole complete new freeway facility. The reason why this is at the bottom of our list, or towards the bottom, is the way that CR2PO worked with the consultant team to define the weighting scenarios and the application of scoring. This solely benefits movement of the independent auto users. There's really no multimodal approach, even in the long-term planning for mobility corridor aspects. And so because this was so focused on benefiting usage of a car, that's why this was put lower. Does anybody have any comments or feedback on this? Whether or not you agree with it, disagree with it, understand its placement, we're good with it. If we'll give a few seconds for somebody to chime in. If not, we'll move on to the next one.
Adam, this is David Hooper. I would just offer that I'm comfortable with what I'm seeing. I think it makes sense. I think before, the idea of an outer belt, so to speak, there was, I believe Bob had mentioned some concern about maybe inadvertently supporting sprawl, and that's not the objective. But
right.
I like that you continue to highlight these, because for those who are in a vehicle, if they're going to opt to go away from I-77, these are critical corridors, each and every one, and good areas to focus on.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, I'll move on. If you feel the need to jump back or something pops in your head, please let us know and we'll do that. But we'll move on to another poor performing strategy, and that would be truck/parking service centers. And that is a very specific thing, but the movement of freight and goods by truck is a very dominant usage of our mobility network. And so there is another recommendation in a separate category that actually states to do a planning study to evaluate the feasibility of additional truck/parking service center locations. And so that's why this says, stemming from the recommended study, regional and local agencies should coordinate to prioritize and construct critical truck parking and/or service facilities, or designate land for such a specific use to encourage the private sector investment during a specific time frame. And what you see in that table to the right is showcasing the 5 areas that the team has come up with to kind of identify generally where it makes sense, because we looked at and we did a brief analysis to understand capacity issues based on existing infrastructure available to trucks traveling, whether it's locally or regionally, inter or intrastate. And most of those facilities were at capacity or very near capacity. And so there was a need to look at what could be. So we're looking at potential implementation of 1 or more service centers up in the I-40, I-77 area, in the I-85/45 section of the City of Charlotte metro area, somewhere near the Charlotte airport, especially with the land terminal there for the intermodal facility, something at I-85 and 77 interchange, which is already tight, and then something maybe along the I-77/45 intersection on the south side of the city, especially near where all the industrial kind of development patterns are occurring at the state line. And so those are the 5 things that came up as a part of my team's recommendations. Anybody have any comments or feelings? And the reason why this is performing lower is because it's very specific to freight. It is only benefiting the freight community. So it's not that it's a poor idea, it's just it's benefiting one specific mode, same as the previous one. Give you a few more seconds. All right, well, again, your silence means a good thing. So, but we'll continue to move forward as we get into some of the more variable ones too. You'll see as we get into those.
Adam, before we move, yes. I just want to ask some of the folks joining on the call from Iredell County, in other parts, obviously, of the corridor. I know there is a lot of sometimes questions or concerns. There is a lot of freight or distribution centers in some of those areas, especially in Iredell, Westinghouse area in South Charlotte. Is there anything that you would like to comment on regards to this? And again, like Adam was saying, this is a poor performing for that specific reason. And we started back in December with over 250 plus strategies, and we have been trimming down, combining, and eliminating from that list. That today we are down to 177. So we know for sure that 100 and plus 170 strategies going into the final report of the study is just not feasible. It's impractical. So if this is performing at the bottom, there is a potential that this recommendation will be out of the final list, if that makes sense. We aren't doing that right now, but there is a likelihood that it will.
Hey, Augustine, this is Andy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I was involved with the regional freight study. I know that was identified as a pretty strong need, and there was some follow-up with providers and the state, and I just don't think it went anywhere. But I think that is important, because what we're seeing, at least in Charlotte, we're seeing kind of spillover effects that when there's not inadequate truck parking, you're seeing people parking on streets and neighborhoods and so forth. So I would hate to totally eliminate this one if possible. I know it's not performing well, but I think there are spillover effects to other modes down the line, even cars and so forth. So, and is this list comprehensive as well? Because I'm wondering if we need something more on the eastern edge as well, 85 and 485.
This list is the 5 items that were identified by the team to document as a part of the list based on the congestion factors and the analysis from that freight study from the facilities that were available. Now, Andy, I will say that's great feedback. There was another line item as a part of this master list that does talk about how to apply a mixed use opportunity onto park and ride lots. So if you can somehow implement, or if the region can somehow implement appropriate information dissemination, there are plenty of park and ride lots that are available at night that can be used as a multi-purpose infrastructure source that can allow for trucks to park there, and then during the day, you then have commuters that can use it for the purposes that it was originally designed to be for. So that's another solution that our team came up with. That's a completely different thing, and it was actually scoring better because of the multimodal impact.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Well, thank you, Andy. And that's exactly the type of feedback that we're looking for. That regardless if it's scoring poorly, there is still a valid reason to keep this strategy and or solution in that list moving forward.
I would like to comment, if I may, Augustine.
Go ahead, sir.
I think that this also has another implication. While it may be a poor performer in some respects because it's not a popular concept, I think this is an issue that's going to resonate very clearly to elected officials in the region. Freight is of critical importance. And in North Carolina, I know there was a movement to bring traffic off I-26 in through I-40 and subsequently down I-77 towards Wando Terminal in Charleston. But if you go out on the interstate, I-77 at 3 o'clock in the morning, it is shipping container after shipping container after shipping container. And the point is, we're distribution. And the intermodal capability of our area in general is critical to the economic viability of this area. And I think that the intermodal facility at Charlotte Douglas is a clear indicator that the level of service has still not been achieved to accommodate the demand. You mentioned Idle County, for example. The Statesville Regional Airport property is bisected by rail. It has very close proximity to I-77, I-40, the interchange itself. It is waiting for intermodal capability, but yet from a practical point of view, there's no place to park a truck in the I-77, I-40 interchange. And so, I look at other areas, you've got the same thing fundamentally in Rowan County and to a large part other areas in Gastonia and in actually in Catawba County, which is beyond the scope of this conversation. But I think you might want to rethink that in terms of its marketability and buy-in from elected officials and in their support of strategies for the I-77 corridor. Just a thought.
Thank you, sir. This is exactly the type of feedback that we're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Appreciate it, Andy and Michael.
Any other comments on truck parking service centers?
Well, I'll make it a rule if you don't mind. I'm trying to avoid being too involved. I just want to be a fly on the wall observing things, but particularly given Michael's comments, I think from I'm not quite clear on how far along some of these kind of labels and structures will get, but the more I've looked at how the past two have been discussed, I think you've got a communications challenge with using the phrase poor performing. I mean, you've explained it, We understand it on this call because they explain it, because it's poor performing, because it doesn't meet that multimodal. But someone coming in cold, someone who was watching this video or just seeing the slides, isn't necessarily going to come to that conclusion. So there might be a labeling issue that could help along there. Perhaps instead of poor performing, like single dimensional or something along those lines, that better communicates with the heading what it is you're actually, why it is this one might not make it through. It's not, poor performing comes across as, oh, that must be a bad idea or something. Whereas when we see truck and parking service centers, like Michael said, we thought, oh yeah, there is a need. That's a strong need. But the issue that isn't that it's poor performing per se, it's that it's a single dimension, and maybe labeling it that way could help.
Love it. No, I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, that's a great comment. Outstanding comment. And I think it's almost, so right now we have been using a scientific approach, but we know all along we know that this is going to be an art and a science. And the art piece is that regardless if it scores 0, it's probably a valid reason why we want to move forward with a specific recommendation. So thank you for that, but I agree. We didn't realize until you mentioned it, but yes, how we label things, I think is going to have a huge impact. And keep in mind, in April, we're going to start the public engagement. So for, outstanding comment. Thank you, Warren. There is a comment on the chat box. I just see it from Bill. Freight movement is a huge element of mobility in this corridor. At one point in time, it was said that Charlotte was the largest trucking center in the eastern United States. Public assistance to the extent it might be practical, whether it is PI 24 or some other solution, I believe to be critical. Thank you, Bill.
Yeah. All right, and we'll work with Augustine on the consultant team to make modifications, and of course, so I do want to relay that the presentation is certainly for, even though it's public record, this was certainly indicated for internal purposes, and poor performing. We will certainly brush that up with something better if we were to communicate that concept in the future. The next one is PR1, region-wide managed lanes network. This is under the category of congestion mitigation on the existing facilities. Taking cues directly from the fast lane study and other state and regional efforts, state and regional agencies should coordinate to prioritize and implement a fully connected managed lanes network that would access all parts of the Charlotte metro region. It would require coordination across 2 states at the same time. And so this is generally stated somewhat on purpose to allow a little bit of flexibility because it didn't want to define what those existing facilities should be, but I know that things have somewhat evolved since the fast lane studies, and I'm sure, Warren, you might have some interesting things to say about this in today's aspects, but we didn't want to get too specific with this one, but the team felt it important to at least document initially.
I appreciate the name check. I didn't really. I think from a Turnpike Authority perspective, ours is we rest solidly on the fact that by state law we don't implement tolling unless the local agency requests it. So to the extent that there's anything related to the managed lanes network or anything of that, it's a default to the MTP, which I think is still going to have managed lanes as a cart post strategy. And candidly, looking at this one, I think one of the strengths of this study that has been going on and has been communicated very well during the course of it is that this is a study of the corridor beyond the interstate itself. So I would suggest, I'll take poor performing strategies or whatever label here, but I think the more that the documentation and the direction it goes in is about the corridor as a whole, and the less anything about the express lanes or managed lanes is mentioned, then probably the better off it'll be received and be dealt with, because the managed lane stuff comes in the MTP, and it's a separate element of cart post strategy. It goes it goes beyond 77 even more so than the Beyond 77 study because of the US 74 aspect in the 485. You know, you've been keeping it tight with 77. The region-wide managed lane network goes well beyond that, out to Matthews and the like. So if nothing about managed lanes makes it through into the Beyond 77, it's not going to give me any heartburn. I don't know about the rest of CARPO, but that's just my take. Thanks.
Sure. And Augustine, I think you have conveyed this before, but I know that the committee has been we have conveyed before about, yes, this is a 77 corridor, but several of these solutions are applicable beyond the corridor itself in some fashion. And so we certainly took into consideration for this one as an example, all the facilities that 77 intersects with to kind of be inclusive of that. And so that's why the team identified this, because that's why it says region-wide, to kind of think beyond even what the CARPO has documented in the MTP process. So, but that's good feedback, Warren, and we'll certainly default to NPO involvement on this one, and if that needs to be firmed up, or if there's a consideration to actually remove that from our next set of recommendations.
Adam, this is Bill.
Yes, sir.
I feel compelled to speak up on behalf of managing our system, whether we call it managed lanes or managed corridors. Given the efforts that have been underway for, a decade perhaps, and inability to construct new facilities simply from a financial and an environmental standpoint, managing the assets that we have becomes absolutely essential to our long-term viability, in my opinion. And to eliminate the idea of a regional management, realizing that this is focusing on lanes, which has now, as Warren pointed out, perhaps become a pejorative term. But managing our corridors, I think, is absolutely crucial. So I can't support this being poor performing.
Okay.
Thank you, Bill.
Let me jump in on that and then again highlight the previous bit about, if I understand correctly, this is considered a poor performing strategy because it's basically one dimension, right? It serves auto travelers of two-axle vehicles, doesn't serve big trucks, doesn't serve pedestrians, doesn't serve cyclists. That's why it's called poor performing, right?
That's correct.
Because it's one dimensional. So
I respectfully point out that it can serve rapid transit extremely well.
You're right. And when we evaluated this, we obviously gave the high rating. There's a high, medium, and low aspect to all of this, which you helped to review earlier this year. The high was given to the car, and then there were a couple of mediums spread across in terms of, as you pointed out, high capacity transit technologies for it to use as an option. And I believe freight was also given a medium benefit as well in terms of improving its level of service. But the other modes that are of an opportunity to be used by folks within the entire network obviously can't touch those lanes. So.
No, this is great. This is great. This is exactly what we're looking for. And like in this particular case for PI1, that we have those two sides of the coin, right? For further discussion. So no, thank you for that. Warren, I think you were going to say something right before I start.
no, I thought better of it. Thanks.
I think the worst thing that could happen is if we're reviewing these ideas, these strategies, and it's just not comments, like nobody's saying anything. So this is good.
Yeah. All right. Oh, yep. Go ahead, Warren.
Well, actually, I apologize. I will stop thinking better of it and ask. Another element that this raises, and forgive me if this has been addressed before and I've just dropped it because y'all are working on it day to day and I'm flitting from one thing to another. But as a strategy about the entire study, how much of it is about identifying new elements, new things for policymakers to consider with regard to the broader 77 corridor, And how much are you concerned with reinforcing things that exist in prior or in existing plans, policies, and so on? So, like, you know, Andy pointed out on the truck stop issues, or, you know, where can trucks rest? That, you know, his point reminded me of it, is very much addressed in the regional freight study that was done. The managed lanes network has been an integral part of CARPO's MTP and planning, going back to the adoption of the fast lane study in 2010. So some of this stuff is already in place. And to what extent is the Beyond 77 study meant to kind of amplify it by saying, us too, this report says it as well? And how much of the Beyond 77 study is about saying, these are things that are new that we've come up with that are specific to the corridor that we've been studying?
I will take this one. To be honest, we don't have a defined element of how much is going to be new, how much is going to be a reinforcement. I think that the real goal of the study is to look above, essentially, and either be in favor of those that are in place, or point out that it is a weak decision. It's something weak in the system. Like, we already have it, but it's weak. And obviously look for new ideas and solutions. I think that question that you raised is a good question for the group, for the project team to go over and evaluate and make that decision. Bob Cook wasn't able to join us this morning, but I think with him and other CRTPS staff, I think that's a really, really good question to go over and try to identify. Are we want to keep the balance, that kind of 50-50, or do we want to be more towards the new strategy, something that is not really already, like, as you point out, in another bylaw, in another MOU, or some kind of the documentation.
And another way to approach it, I'm taking some inspiration just from the slide on the screen, is elements of the Beyond 77 study that exist in other studies could simply be communicated as reinforcing that. You know, this study reinforces the existing fast lane study in MTP. This strategy reinforces the existing one, and that could let you, as you polish the final document for folks who haven't been part of this journey and are coming to seeing the final product, you can more explicitly kind of differentiate between, this is a new idea from this study versus this study, you know, reinforces what already exists. Again, a communication strategy thought. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Adam, were you going to say something?
Nope, that was on point. Love it. Thank you for that feedback, Warren, and we will continue to move on. The next one is freight signal prioritization on key freight corridors. This is one of those single dimensional items, not necessarily poor performing. And so this is under the signal prioritization systems. There are only a few that exist under that category because it is so specific, but they are very large network applications. And it's specifically designed for trucks, and talking about connected vehicle truck technology, and identifying those key freight corridors where these could and should be applicable. And if they are, we have another one that's signal prioritization for multimodal aspects, but this one was documented for freight specifically because the team recognized that one could go before the other if the region chose to do so, and there would be a scalable approach to then implement beyond those efforts, but you'd have a base layer of infrastructure built in for this. So wanted to understand if there was any feedback on this one as a single dimensional item, as Warren has helped us to define today. Appreciate that, by the way. Or if there's other ways that you might see we need to define this one differently. Okay, well, if something pops up, just let me know. We'll come back to it. Another single dimensional aspect is related to freight. This one is tied to getting information out to the drivers across the region as they enter through and drive throughout, is to help them understand where available parking is and what existing conditions are out there that allows them to safely travel, and then even some appropriate loading and unloading schedules if the local jurisdiction has some of those constraints applied. So it's kind of putting out some information through smart application technologies, through whatever platforms trucks are using, through their proprietary or smartphone systems. But this is something that a region can coordinate with local jurisdictions and agencies to develop and push out to that world. Again, any thoughts on this one? Okay, well, we will continue the discussion again. As if ideas pop up, please let us know. And Augustine did share the list of what we defined as critical components for review in advance of this meeting, so you have these in PDF form as a part of that file. He sent that out a few days ago, I believe. And so if you want to reference that as you continue to think about those ideas, we can come back. Another kind of this is single dimensional in terms of infrastructure aspects. It can apply to multimodal components, but it doesn't really benefit a whole lot of other needs as opposed to improving mobility, but it could improve asset management. And so we're looking at smart and or integrated pavement. And this came up as a part of our team discussion that regional and or local agencies coordinate with local jurisdictions to either implement a pilot or full-fledged corridor-based smart/integrated pavement, or any type of surface condition. And that surface infrastructure could include sensors that then inform the managing agencies of physical condition and better inform maintenance schedules. The pavement could also incorporate innovative foundational-based structures such as solar panels or even illuminated pavement, which has been used and proven as safety features in other countries around the world to specific users. Any feedback or comments on this one as a recommendation as a part of the current list?
As a reminder, the header below the smart integrated payment is the naming of the main category that we refer as umbrellas. And so all of these individual line items with the number ET31, 177, they all belong to one of 30 umbrellas.
All right, well, we'll continue the conversation and we're going to move into those items that had the variable outputs from the evaluation process. And these are going to probably pose some conversation. And I'm sure that some of you are looking at this slide and be like, really? But the consultant team has had some recent explorations and understanding of what's happening around the world in terms of what's happening above the surface of our transportation network. And we decided that it would be appropriate to at least include as an initial recommendation to move forward, at least with our discussions today and in the next couple of months, to talk about urban air mobility and the fact that the region should consider constructing one or more vertiport facilities. Vertiports are actually technically different from a helipad or a heliport because vertiport facilities cater to the use of public and or private operations of electric vehicles that are capable of vertical takeoffs and landings. Believe it or not, the FAA is going through approval processes right now to allow these to exist, and the city of Orlando has just commissioned several construction sites for these to exist to allow for the public and private use of these items or these new technologies. And the projections are showing that urban air mobility will become a massive economic engine in the next decade and a half should cities and regions adopt. And so we felt that it would be at least important to highlight it and put it on folks' radars if that is the choice and the desire. So I will certainly look for some comments on this.
I'll get the nitpicky one out of the way. Spell check on university in the lower right.
Thank you, sir. Good catch.
Otherwise, I'm just awed by the facility concept. So that's going to be plenty of food for thought.
think Jetsons, but now.
Does anyone know? I think also City of Raleigh, since they have the NCDOT headquarters and everyone over there for NCDOT for the most part, I think they also looking a lot into this. I don't know if anyone knows more details or wants to elaborate. Since Adam mentioned about Orlando, City of Orlando, if we're doing this anywhere in the state or contemplating this idea.
Adam, this is David. One question comes to mind, and I don't want to get too far afield, but how do vertiports and their infrastructure needs, how are they going to interact with CAV and the infrastructure needs on the ground? Are there any conflicts, any compatibilities there that might be relevant that you could summarize fairly quickly?
That's a good question, and I have been trying to wrap my head around and explore the research as I've come across it and been a part of some webinars to learn more, so I can at least be educated a little bit to talk about it with you guys here in the region. They're different systems, to be honest with you, and so I've learned is that anything above the surface is pretty much regulated by the FAA, but the infrastructure to support the use of those vehicles still is mandated and regulated by the agency or by the local jurisdiction or agencies that coordinate with said with the FAA and those technology providers. And so they are different systems in the CAV. So I think, and please don't quote me, I'd have to send you some more resources, David and others on the call, but it's similar to kind of how people use commercial drones, and there are geofencing applications provided to kind of limit people's usage, but it's still being fleshed out here in America. There are some great case studies out of Central Europe where they're doing this, especially in Germany, where they're helping to do some connections to foster quick trips in and out of an airport for people that need to catch a flight, but they're making sure that it stays out of the restricted airspace so that it doesn't conflict with the commercial aviation usage. So I will certainly send and follow up with some more detail based on what I've learned, but they're different systems.
It's one thing that kind of comes to mind as I think about all this, whether it's this technology or CAVs, and we're also going to have vehicles out there and a variety of other things. The emphasis or kind of the big picture transition to infrastructure, and I mean technological management and coordination, is really going to be something a couple of decades out.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, David. It is not a part of our discussion today. As a part of the greater list, there is a couple of recommendations that encourage a policy development for consideration for the region to look at and understand how there needs to be better data governance and management across transportation networks and even across the state line to facilitate better kind of corridor management components, but then also there's a couple of recommendations that stem from that policy definition that encourage the programmatic components to allow that governance to exist. We don't get too specific with how we recommend it to actually exist. We just say that it needs to be explored further in the future, because you're right, there will be volumes and volumes of data, and frankly, American cities or cities around the world are just starting to figure out what to do with them.
There is a question from Bill. Is this for movement of people or the deliverables or both? I think the answer is essentially for both. My understanding of this type of a strategy is that initially it's going to start with deliverables, but eventually to move on to also people.
That's correct. And so there are some cities, Bill, that are looking at it from like a taxi service with limited functionality in terms of air corridors. You see on this slide here, I put down Charlotte Airport vertiport links. And the reason why we documented as a team is I know that in the past planning efforts, there was talks of Charlotte Douglas building or constructing a people mover to connect with the Silver Line. But if there was the opportunity to look at how to use urban air mobility efforts to connect people from the Silver Line to the terminal in a more efficient and effective way without putting down all that rail infrastructure, that could be another alternative to evaluate in the next several years. So just something like food for thought for the region to consider moving forward. So with that, I will continue to move on to the next one. We developed a couple of different collective groupings of what we're calling connectivity enhancements around and across the interstate. And the one that the team developed for looking at opportunities in the Iredell County area, we still require some coordination with the Iredell Master Transportation Planning effort going on, but we are doing that as we speak. We came up with 4 items that were not already captured. And these are things that are not planned, not programmed, but my team felt it would be important to at least document for consideration in the future for either the county or the MPO to somehow prioritize and adopt into the future. And so we don't get very specific. We do talk about where new connections could be made or bike and greenway improvements could be developed in certain portions of that section. And so I want to double check with the chat box really quick. And I want to see if there's any comments or thoughts on this one. I apologize, we do have about 15 minutes left. Okay, we'll continue to move forward. We do have a few more to go through on these. This one is single dimensional again, devoted straight to freight. This is getting information out to freight travelers again, just like the smart parking information. This is a bigger bundle of applications for freight that goes just beyond parking and service opportunities. But really, there's this whole suite of solutions that a region can implement to then push out to drivers that enter a certain zone to understand everything that impacts a truck's operational needs. And so we felt that it was important to document and include for coordination with state and local and regional agencies to push forward. Any comments on Fratus? Okay. The next couple are, they're simple connected vehicle technologies, and they are performing variably because they have some limitations with just frankly the number of modes they interact with, but they're still important. We, at least our team, felt for the initial process because of the safety implications they provide overall to the system if implemented on any level. And so this one is a stop sign gap assist. It's a lot of text that basically says that there's in-vehicle communication technologies associated with infrastructure already on the ground that helps cars with warning systems understand about issues with stop signs and approaching traffic on the cross roadway and whatnot. And so this is something that we felt important to put out there, and then it kind of computes dynamic state of the intersection in order to issue appropriate warnings and alerts to both drivers and both roadways. Any comments on the stop sign gap assist? Okay. And the last one of their performance that we wanted to touch base with you all is Mr. Hoffman and I will certainly send you those 4 general connectivity enhancements. We will make sure that you have that list available. I did coordinate with the consultant team performing that work and Matthew Todd, but I will double check and make sure that you have that same communication so that you're aware of that and coordination can move forward. The last one here, again, similar connected vehicle component, vehicle warning right in front of bus warning. These are specific at intersections where transit interactions occur, so as to alert bus drivers when vehicles are attempting to turn right in front of a bus. when departing a near side stop. Connected vehicle technology can be done today using onboard sensors that can monitor surrounding vehicles. Any comments on this recommendation? Okay, well, I appreciate all the feedback on several of those items. That actually concludes that section of those critical components from our overall analysis. Like Augustine said, we do have over 170 individual line items. And when we go into public engagement, which I will describe just shortly, you'll understand how we're going after the public and how we're going to be transparent with the public and you all to make sure that the list can be consumed, but there will be ways to weigh in a non-complicated manner. So 1 second. We developed a survey as a part of our other phases of engagement. This survey is going to be our primary call to action. It is not necessarily to weigh in on the list in detail because I can't imagine asking your grandmother to look at that list and provide comments on it. So the survey goal is really to educate them about our process and then to allow them to decide on the final weighting scenarios and those 6 overarching categories. And that will then finally inform the CRTPO exactly where the public is saying, and then of course we will make sure that we tweak it as we need, but their feedback will weigh in heavily on how that gets defined moving forward, because then that ultimately informs how everything gets evaluated and prioritized for an implementation action plan moving forward later this summer. But in full transparency, we have created an interactive strategies and solutions dashboard we are working to publish online through the project's website. While again, this is not the primary call to action, you and everybody else living in the region will have the ability to check out our list through we'll create a manual on how to use it, because it's not a website, it's a data dashboard. And so you'll be able to look through those 4 key areas and then through those 30 categories, and anything that is a mappable component that has geospatial attributes, such as those connectivity enhancements in Iredell County, there will be a mapping feature associated so they can better understand where we're suggesting a project for implementation. But the purpose of this is also to help tie that we're not actually drawing out a corridor specifically unless it's already been defined by an initiative like Connect Beyond that you saw on those maps prior. This is really an exercise to help connect, as you have all deemed important in prior conversations, to showcase that connection between land use planning and transportation planning efforts. And so we use the baseline data of the traffic analysis zones from all the data that we collected last year to showcase in that mixed use indicator that we developed where we felt it would be most effective for local and regional jurisdictions to start looking at in a certain area to implement a specific concept or project. Other things like a policy or a program can be applied for the entire metropolitan region. And so you'll see that it will zoom back out to be the 12 county area. So I wanted to make sure that was clear, but that will again be available online after people do create or finish that survey. What we're doing through April 1st through May 15th, we will have 4 different sessions kind of set up for different types of audiences. The image that you see on the left is what the public has seen the entire time on the website. That's their public perspective of where we are in the project. And they'll be able to, and what they're saying is they'll choose preferred transportation solutions and weigh on funding options. That's exactly what they're doing as a part of the survey. What we're doing in terms of virtual events, all of them will be virtual. We're doing 2 general public sessions, which have not yet been scheduled. We are in the process of looking at calendars to make those documented. The second one is community partnerships. Instead of asking people to come to us, we are going to them. And my team has worked with CRTPO to identify 20 or so different community organizations, chambers of commerce, institutions that have or host board meetings that involve the public, and we have reached out to them to be a part of that board meeting or that committee meeting. And we have gotten a time slot as a part of their efforts to update them on our project and ask them to come weigh in and be a part of our efforts moving forward if they have not already done so. The third one is a media open house. This one is scheduled for April 1st. And we have done this before in person though, before COVID became shut us down last year. We are going to go to the media outlets and we're going to invite them actually to come to us for a little bit, but we might do one-on-ones with the larger outlets that are interested and get them excited about the progress of the project and help them spread the word of our efforts. And this is a part of our massive engagement effort to continue the great success that we're having with getting lots of word out about Beyond 77. And the fourth one is an on-demand virtual expo is what we're calling it. And many of you have probably been involved with projects before with other consultants that have hosted or published some of these rooms that allow people to attend an open house like they were there in person, but on their phones or on their computers. And so this is an image of what it will look like. And I do want to pull it up live for you to kind of show you an example. It's still in development as we speak. 1 second.
While we wait on that, I just want to elaborate a little bit on the database. It's through Power BI. So we're going to be sending that, I'll be sending that email or an email with that link along with other materials from this meeting and more information. So you're going to be able, again, you're going to be able to review all 177 strategies. And the instructions, it's not complicated, but we're just going to be providing some instructions on how to navigate. Just want to make sure. And also for you to provide comments, because during this almost 1.5 hours, we only review 15, the top 5, the bottom 5, and the 5 with the highest variation. So the variation depending on the scenario, which scenario we use, they score high or they score poorly. So we review 15 out of 177. So the goal is, or the task for this committee is for you to review on your own time and give us feedback. Now, if the website or the link that we sent is too much for you, then just let me know and I will be happy to provide you a PDF copy. But again, that's going to be pages, I believe 11 or more pages long of a PDF.
That's right. So what you see on the screen really quick, can you hear me okay, Augustine?
Yes.
Okay. This is taking up a little bandwidth because it is pretty graphically heavy. We will have an expo center completely custom designed to match the region and to fit the region's look. This is for a project out in Colorado as an example of what we produced earlier this spring for that client. But we will have an orientation, a welcome. It's kind of like an expo center, literally. And we'll kind of do some icons to kind of orient people that this is the Charlotte region, not necessarily tied to one local jurisdiction, but we'll do things to make it regional in sense to make sure that Statesville and Rock Hill and everybody in between are represented, whether it's through seals or flags or even kind of Main Street images on the walls as they look outside a window. And then easy arrow cues to kind of navigate. We wanted to be super simple. What you saw earlier as a part of this presentation is going to serve as some of those core foundational messaging to the public. There'll be a couple other things that we're working on for graphics purposes, but I did just want to make sure that you saw what was in the works. Augustine, we will have something for you to review probably by the end of next week so that it can go live after some of your feedback by April 1st.
That is correct.
And so with that, we have one more thing. I will let Augustine key it up really quick regarding some potential new thought for a naming scheme that we came up with. And Augustine, I'll let you introduce it before I click next.
Because we have a couple more minutes, so before I go through basically the next action items, just want to ask one last time if there are any comments or questions. I see one comment from Michael about excellent presentation. Thank you so much for that. And we'll be meeting this afternoon with the advisory committee, which is composed of the board and elected officials to go over policy driven. So there was none of these strategies that we review pertinent to policy, but again, the goal is to review with the advisory committee that type of strategies. We're also going to be meeting with focus groups such as bike and ped groups, transit groups, and others to also narrow or get particular comments and feedback from that type of, 4 some of those strategies related to those groups. That's going to be happening over the next couple of months. Oh, I forgot to mention CRAF as well for some of the regional components and strategies that will have an effect in the entire region rather than just the corridor. Now, and I think that's the next part is if none of that works, we do have a contingency plan. So just to finish on a fun note, but I will let LaVar Bull explain us what's that contingency plan. Uh-oh, the sound doesn't work.
Oh no.
Yeah, you're not showing the sound from your screen.
But if you didn't saw Saturday Night Live about 2 weeks ago, he's talking about how
Killed it. Sorry, guys.
the Carolinas were going to be united by his son, LaMelo Ball. So go ahead.
We're just going to call it Carolossus. That's the new name of the region. Carolossus. I'm sorry that this didn't work out. We'll work out the King Suite Advisory Group, but I'll send you all the link and you can watch the video later. And if you don't like SNL, I'm sorry. Any final thoughts? We finished right on time.